Almost immediately, 27 out of 32 tanks sunk, owing to the bad weather and rough seas. Things.
I knew that was gonna. I knew it. All right. The reason why Germany failed on D-Day.
By the spring of 1944,
Let's get it.
Things were looking grim for Nazi Germany. Already starved of key resources and under severe pressure in the east, the Western Allies were now poised to launch their long-awaited invasion of Western Europe. And yet, Germany's leader, Adolf Hitler, was, despite everything, looking forward to D-Day. His plan was simple: reinforce the Western defences, launch a furious counterattack, and throw the Allies back into the sea. After that, he could turn his full strength against the Soviet Union and end the war. For Hitler,
Not a bad idea. You know, it's funny because D-Day should have failed. D-Day should have failed. Dwight Eisenhower even drafted a letter just in case it failed. It really blows my mind how Germany lost themselves the war. Because spring 1944, Germany really and truly, like, they were on the back end, but it wasn't like over yet. It wasn't over for them yet. It was until after Operation Bagration, the worst military disaster in German history, that's when it was actually over.
the outcome of this campaign would be decisive. In the previous episode of our D-Day series, we looked at the air battle for Normandy. This time, we're covering the fighting on land that would make or break the operation. Why were some beaches bloodier than others? Why did German counterattacks fail? And why did it take so long for the Allies to break out into France? To answer those questions, we brought in the help of the Royal Armoury's Jonathan Ferguson to look at some of the most important weapons of D-Day. But more later on.
Okay, I actually look forward to seeing that.
General Sir Frederick E. Morgan. You might never have heard of him, but in his role as Cossack, it was Morgan who wrote the first plan for Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Europe. The Allied landing site would be Normandy, but with a major deception operation to focus German eyes on the Pas de Calais.
It blows my mind how Germany fell for that. I think about this all the time. I really do. Because you would think to yourself, come on, I'm not being a hindsight warrior. I always say this in my reactions that people use too much hindsight to make like very bad takes on history. But in my personal opinion, just like, come on, Calais is like the most obvious target. It's just too obvious of a target. Like, oh my gosh, this is like what I always say, man, that the Germans lost themselves the war. It's like, come on, Calais, really? Like,
airborne forces would secure the flanks, while assault forces would...
Because if you look at Normandy, you have Cherbourg right there, right? And you have Caen right there. Two vital, important cities, man. So, common sense would tell you, hey, maybe they're gonna try and land somewhere around here to cut off one of these ports, you know? Because look at all of these major cities nearby. But freaking Calais, like, no. And not only that, but like, this is a peninsula, right? You could cut this off. And you would have a good foothold, right? So, I mean, it's common sense, man.
Would land with Americans on the right and British and Commonwealth forces on the left. In lieu of capturing a major port, Morgan also settled on the ingenious solution of bringing two prefabricated harbours across the Channel to supply an Allied breakout. When Dwight D. Eisenhower was appointed commander of SHAEF and Bernard Montgomery commander of the Allied ground forces in December 1943, the responsibility for Overlord passed to them. But the only major change they made was to increase the strength of the air and seaborne landings. With a wider front, the first target would be Caen, and after that, the port of Cherbourg. After surviving the inevitable German counterattack, Montgomery expected the Germans to retreat to defensive positions on the River Seine within 3 months of the landings. But that did not mean that this campaign would be an easy one. The divisions chosen to carry out the invasion were augmented with extra units. Both the British and Commonwealth and American forces were equipped with duplex drive or DD tanks which would swim to the shore, while the British were further reinforced by more specialist armour.
Rather than engage enemy tanks, the tanks that landed on the beaches were primarily intended to provide fire support for the infantry by suppressing enemy pillboxes and gun positions. Many of them would be so-called funnies, like this one, which were the brainchild of Major General Sir Percy Hobart. This Churchill AVRE, short for Armoured Vehicle Royal Engineers, was equipped with what was known as a spigot mortar instead of a standard tank gun, which enabled it to fire large, high-explosive charges capable of destroying pillboxes and bunkers. It could also be fitted with various attachments that could aid the movement of other vehicles across the beach, such as a small box girder bridge, a bobbin, which was a giant roll of canvas that could be laid over soft sand, or large bundles of wood known as fascines that could be used to fill trenches and ditches.
Bro, I always think about how we build all of this technology to fight other people. And I always think to myself, what if we just didn't? Obviously, that's impossible. I know that's impossible. Humans are always good. Bloody hell. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning. So my speech is a bit weird. I'm like sleepy. But humans are always going to kill each other. I know that. But guys, just think about it for 1 second, for goodness sakes. Imagine if we just stopped doing that and we actually like put our genius thinking into other stuff. Bro, I believe we would be able to freaking colonize space by now. Because I believe the reason why because, you know, everyone knows that we're kind of like not really, we're not really like close to like doing anything noteworthy in space yet. But I believe the only reason why that's the case is simply because there's no will to do it. You know, there's just no will to do it. So no one is really doing anything. The only person who's doing that's Elon Musk. But I always think to myself, what if we just stopped like focusing on killing each other and we actually like put all those resources to something like space, bruh? That's crazy, bro. We could be living in somewhat of a cinematic sci-fi universe when you really and truly think about it.
As the massive invasion force built up in Britain, including an entirely fake army group poised to attack Calais, the Germans were building up their defences. By this point in the war, the German Air Force and Navy were largely a spent force. Thus, the defence of Fortress Europe would fall on the shoulders of the German army, and in particular, Army Group B, commanded by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. Rommel believed that Germany's best chance of countering an invasion would be to stop the Allies at the water's edge of the much vaunted Atlantic Wall. Begun in 1942, it was still far from complete, but from early 1944, Rommel oversaw a massive strengthening of the existing fortifications, adding pillboxes, gun emplacements, beach obstacles, and millions of mines, many of them in the Normandy sector.
Yeah, that's another reason why Germany lost D-Day is that another reason why Germany simply lost themselves the war is they really could have made defenses and they really did not. They really did. It really blows my mind how Germany could have done it, but they just did not do it. And the Atlantic Wall, if it was completed, because the Atlantic Wall wasn't near completion by the time D-Day happened. If the Atlantic Wall is completed, I'm pretty sure if it was 100%, D-Day would be next to impossible.
The units charged with holding these positions varied as much as the defences themselves. Though there were 58 German divisions in the theatre by May 1944, many of them were poor quality garrison troops, from which the fittest and most able had been combed to feed the meat grinder in the east. Destroying the invaders would come down to the 9 Panzer and 1 Panzer Grenadier Division in the theatre, with a total of 1,400 tanks and self-propelled guns. The only problem was, Rommel had no control over them. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commander of all German army forces in the west, and General Geyer von Schweppenberg, commander of the Armoured Reserve Panzer Group West, disagreed with Rommel. They argued for a defence-in-depth strategy, holding the panzers further back.
Rommel wanted the panzers positioned much closer to the most likely landing sites. He knew that the Allies had air superiority, which would significantly restrict movement in the battle of maneuver that Rundstedt and Schweppenberg favored. Not only that, but if the Allies were permitted to establish a beachhead, their vast resources in men and materiel would ensure that they could wear down Germany's finite resources by continuously feeding fresh divisions into France.
Rommel was actually right. I don't even know how this was even a debate. I really don't know how this was a debate. Because in Italy 1943, I forgot which landing it was. I'm pretty sure this was in Sicily? No. Was it in Sicily? No, I think it was somewhere else. A different landing somewhere in Italy in 1943. And it almost got defeated because the Germans launched a big panzer attack. I really forgot which landing that was. And the only reason why it wasn't defeated was simply because the Allies had to use their ships to shore bombard. Had they not used their ships to do that, to destroy those panzers that were coming, yeah, that landing would have been out of the window. I really forgot what landing that was. But it blows my mind how the Germans didn't take that into consideration, or should I better say, the other people in the German high command, aside from Rommel, didn't take that into consideration at all. And also Rommel is also right, because allow them to get freaking resources, get a foothold, they can just pour all their resources in. I mean, this is not even a debate, man.
In the end, after the argument had been taken to Hitler, a tactically unsound compromise was reached. Of the 9 panzer divisions and 1 panzer grenadier division in the west, Rommel would be given 3. Von Schweppenberg would get 4 to be held in reserve, while the remaining 3 were deployed to the south of France as part of the new Army Group G. Hitler also stipulated that Panzer Group West could only be deployed with his permission, which would prove to be costly for the Germans on D-Day.
Wawa has the right.
D-Day was scheduled
Again, the Germans lost themselves the war.
for the 5th of June 1944. But in the preceding days, terrible weather conditions forced Eisenhower to postpone the invasion by 24 hours. This was a difficult decision. Any delay made it increasingly difficult to keep the operation a secret, but over the
It's funny because he talks about how the operation was a secret, but, and I think everyone should know this, but the German Kriegsmarine, they actually detected the troop buildup in England, literally in England. And they launch small S-boats, torpedo boats. And hilariously enough, ironically enough, those boats caused more casualties than, I think they did more damage than the actual, fighting on the beaches. They either did more damage or it was a bit under. The point is, it kind of really blows my mind how, despite that attack and the fact that the Kriegsmarine literally detected the buildup of the troops for D-Day, the Germans just didn't expect it to come on Normandy. It's really weird how the high command just,
meteorologists predicted
I don't know,
a temporary break in the weather, and based on this information, Eisenhower ordered that the invasion proceed, on the 6th of June.
This is the letter issued to thousands of troops bound for Normandy on the eve of the invasion, written by Supreme Commander Eisenhower. In it, he says that the task will not be an easy one, that the enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle hardened, but Eisenhower also says that he has the full confidence in the troops' courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle, and that nothing less than victory will be accepted. For the men who received this letter, there was of course a mix of feelings, but the mood was captured incredibly well by then Major James Robert Morgan, who was second in command of the British 120th Light Anti-Aircraft Regiment. In this letter to his wife, written on the back of Eisenhower's message, Morgan says, "I'm looking forward immensely to the next few hours. At present, I look just like Father Christmas in full equipment with binoculars dangling on my chest. Well, my darling, I'll soon be back with you both. Save some of the tomatoes for me and keep this letter as a reminder of a terrific event in history. All my love, Jim."
The first Allied troops into Normandy were British and Canadian airborne forces of the 6th Airborne Division. Landing by glider and parachute to the east of Sword Beach, their main task was to capture and hold important bridges over the Caen Canal and River Orne. Despite scattered landings, they managed to capture their objectives, but to hold on to them, the lightly armed troops would have to fend off German armoured counterattacks. To tell us more, here's the Royal Armoury's Jonathan Ferguson.
Hi guys, Jonathan here in the National Firearms Centre here at the Royal Armouries Museum, and I'm here with the PIAT. So PIAT stands for Projector Infantry Anti-Tank. Common misconception that it's a big spring catapult thing, absolutely untrue. The spring, there is a big spring in here. It's to absorb the huge recoil of what this really is, which is a spigot mortar, normally something fired based in the ground, but it's fired from the shoulder. So this idea of harnessing the Monroe effect that's in here, but from a shoulder-fired weapon. That's what makes this thing really quite remarkable and much better than people think it was. Although there are some pretty heavy caveats there in terms of you've got to get very close, it's an arcing trajectory, your first hit might bounce off if it doesn't hit just right.
So you're telling me that if it bounces off the freaking tank, bro, you're basically dead. You're basically dead.
One of the most iconic accounts of the use of the PIAT associated with D-Day is at Pegasus Bridge. We have Major John Howard of D Company, 2nd Battalion, Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry. He relates this story of Sergeant Thornton, Wagger Thornton as he calls him, who essentially saves the day with a PIAT. He's managed to get close enough to where he thinks he's going to be able to score a decisive hit on a tank, always the problem with the PIAT. And just as Howard is about to order the men in with anti-tank grenades to try and kill this thing, Thornton lets loose with the PIAT bomb and just knocks the tank out outright. That causes the Germans to think that there's anti-tank artillery in play and to stop what they're doing and rethink, and turns the tide of that battle at that bridge, because they were going to get annihilated one after the other. Now that might have been true with the PIAT as well, but it's punching above its weight, and it's a really almost unique account of a single shoulder-fired weapon turning the tide of a battle.
Very interesting if you compare that to the Panzerfaust. The Panzerfaust, I think the PIAT is honestly better than the Panzerfaust, to be honest. Because the PIAT and the Panzerfaust, they have the same major flaw in it, that you have to get really close. That's very interesting. Tell me, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think is better, Panzerfaust or the PIAT? That's very, very, very debatable. I probably would go with the PIAT, to be honest.
To the west, the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions were landing on the Cotentin Peninsula behind Utah Beach. They were to secure the exits, allowing the amphibious troops landing later in the morning to move on towards the vital port of Cherbourg. The drop zones were supposed to be marked by elite pathfinders ahead of the main force, who used special radar transponder beacons known as Eurekas to guide them in. But by the time they jumped, a massive cloud bank had formed over the Cotentin Peninsula, causing many of the pathfinders to miss their target, and when they did land, many couldn't get the Eurekas to work. The result was chaos.
Many of the drops became widely scattered. For example, the majority of the 2nd Battalion, 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment jumped over the wrong drop zone and then spent most of D-Day trying to reassemble. However, others that mislanded were able to improvise and form groups that were a mishmash of units, which went on to achieve their objectives. One of those to jump on D-Day was 29-year-old Sergeant Floyd Corrington, an assistant squad leader in the 2nd Platoon of Dog Company, 506 PIR, 101st Airborne Division. He was wearing this helmet when his C-47, which also carried his platoon commander, Lieutenant Ronald Spears, took off for Normandy and was wearing it when he jumped at about 1:20 a.m. Little is known of what happened to Corrington after he jumped, but he was reported to have been killed in action on D-Day. His helmet was later found near the hamlet of Basse-Adeville, just south of Drop Zone C, where his unit was meant to land. Corrington now lies in the Normandy American Cemetery at Colville-sur-Mer.
Interesting.
Though the American airborne drops
Very
didn't
interesting.
quite go to plan, they caused chaos and confusion amongst the German defenders and secured the exits from Utah Beach. By now, the Allied air and sea bombardment of the beach defences had begun. The volume of fire was huge, but the results were inconsistent. The strong points that survived would exact a heavy toll. On Utah Beach, the landings were a huge success. The troops were accidentally landed well south of their designated landing zone, in an area that was only lightly defended. Quick-thinking commanders exploited this, and by 10 a.m, all enemy resistance was cleared at a cost of just 197 casualties. A few miles east, however, the landing at Omaha became a bloodbath.
Wow. So you're telling me that the place that they were supposed to land was actually much more defended, much more deadlier. Wow, the irony.
Of the 5 invasion beaches, Omaha was without a doubt the most challenging. Most of the 6-mile-long beach was dominated by steep bluffs around 150 feet high, which gave the German strongpoints excellent fields of view and fire over an area littered with mines, obstacles and barbed wire. The only way through the bluffs were through 5 gullies known as exits. Of course, the Germans knew how important they were, and these exits were quite literally turned into death traps. To tell us more, here's Jonathan once again.
We are looking at the infamous MG42 general purpose machine gun. So this was intended to be a universal machine gun, and it served in that role. It's in front of me here on its bipod for use as a light machine gun. Where this thing has become truly iconic is in the defensive role, and that's sort of throughout the back half of the war, but especially D-Day and especially Omaha Beach.
I've seen the MG42. I know that's like German squads would if I'm wrong, do correct me. I know German squads would always have like one machine gunner because it would act as a very good suppressing fire, and because of this, German squads, at least in the like 1941, 1942, I'm not sure about 1943 and 1944, but I know that German squads always had typically a fire control advantage because of their machine gun companions, to say the least.
So we have belt feed, ideal for sustained fire, for suppressive fire, for defensive fire, and to allow for that we have a replaceable barrel system, allowing for a much lower overall weight and complexity than the old water-cooled system, which is extremely effective for sustained fire, but made for a much heavier, more awkward gun. So those two things, plus some very solid engineering, mean that not very many German soldiers can seriously inconvenience an awful lot of Allied soldiers. And this is really summed up in the experience and the claims of Heinrich Severloh, who wrote his memoir published it in 2000, and he claimed to have killed between 1,000 and 2,000 American soldiers on Omaha Beach.
Freaking beast of Omaha, bruh.
Strongly contested numbers, but regardless, if there are many like Heinrich, and I suspect there were, this thing's a sort of force multiplier, and in the defensive role, they're able to hold off thousands of attacking Allied soldiers, keep heads down if they're not actively killing and wounding people, if you need a gun for defensive fire, whatever you think of the MG42, it's a very capable weapon in that role.
Yo, those are nice.
The Allies had planned for a fierce naval bombardment, followed by an attack by Allied bombers that would obliterate these strong defenses before the first wave of troops hit the beach at 6:30 a.m. But the bombardment was inadequate and the bombers missed most of their targets, which left most of the German defenses still standing. To make matters worse on Omaha, the concept of the DD tanks that would float and swim to shore ended in disaster. The 741st Tank Battalion disembarked most of its DD tanks about 15,000 feet out from the shore. Almost immediately, 27 out of 32 tanks sunk, owing to the bad weather and rough seas. Things
I knew that was gonna. I knew it. Oh my gosh, man.
didn't quite go to plan for the infantry either. Strong winds and currents put many of the landing craft off course, and some got swamped.
Dude, that's so funny to me still. Like, imagine, right? Oh, I can only imagine That's something that I shouldn't laugh at, but still. Imagine thinking to yourself, alright, this thing should be able to hold. They told me that's gonna hold, and then immediately as soon as you get in the water, you sink.
Drowned the heavily laden infantry inside. Other landing craft hit sandbars that forced the infantry to wade up the beach in sometimes neck-high water, greatly extending the time that they were exposed to enemy fire. The situation became so perilous that General Omar Bradley, commander of the American ground forces, briefly considered halting the landings on Omaha and diverting the assault forces to Utah Beach.
Slowly, however, small groups of men began to exploit gaps in the defences, and by the evening, the situation had finally begun to stabilise. 34,000 troops had landed on Omaha by the end of the day, at a cost of over 2,400 men killed, wounded, or missing, by far the highest cost in human life of any of the 5 invasion beaches.
Yeah, honestly, that's really nothing compared to like the other battles that were going on. I mean, like, come on. I mean, D-Day is like so overhyped because, you know, it's American propaganda. People say, I remember back in 8th grade, actually, my teacher was like, oh, D-Day turned the tide of the war. And I was like, what? No, it didn't. Like, no. No. Because Operation Bagration, when it was still happening, the Germans were completely deceived. Just like how they were deceived on D-Day, actually. It really blows my mind how much the Germans were deceived in freaking World War II. But they were, you know? And the Soviets still would have crushed Army Group Center. So even if D-Day didn't really happen, I mean, like, the German army in the Eastern Front, I just, because I've thought about this. I've literally thought about making videos on this, on how Germany could have like pulled off a victory after Stalingrad, which I'm still probably gonna try and do a video on, by the way. But what I have to do is I have to do my video on Sea Lion first. That's the one I'm doing, because I do believe Sea Lion was possible. Because I thought about that. But like Operation Bagration, like that, like no way Germany could have avoided that. They were completely deceived. So, and coincidentally, it just happened like around the same time as D-Day. So if D-Day had failed, well, Germany, it was already over for Germany. So
An hour after the Americans, British, Canadian, and Free French assault troops began landing to their east on Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches. The 50th Division at Gold Beach faced strong German resistance, and though they got well off the beach, they failed to take all their objectives. At Juno, Canadian forces made the strongest inroads into Normandy of any Allied formation after tough house-to-house fighting. And likewise at Sword, the initial assault went mostly to plan.
This bomb
funny how Canadians, I have plenty of people from Australia, New Zealand, that watch my stuff. Hell, even India. A lot of people from a lot of Commonwealth countries that watch my videos, but I don't really see any Canadians on my Canadians watching me. I think it's like very few, shockingly enough. Canada is so Americanized. Ugh.
Bombardment was carried out by the largest naval bombardment fleet of those supporting the 5 beaches, so the weight of firepower was immense. The majority of the DD tanks made it to the beach in almost the same time as the infantry, giving the latter the fire support and cover that they needed to move up the beach. The funnies immediately got to work clearing paths through the obstacles and minefields, filling ditches, and then engaging enemy strongpoints with their heavy petard mortars. Though many were hit and knocked out, the surviving crews dismounted and cleared obstacles by hand. Within 2 hours of landing, 7 of 8 beach exits were cleared. Of course, this is not to say that the assault on Sword was easy. One of the German strongpoints on Sword, codenamed Cod, took 3 hours to capture, with 2 of the attacking battalions taking 25% casualties each.
Nah, it's not really bad, to be
The battle
honest.
for Sword Beach was relatively quick, and by the end of D-Day, nearly 29,000 troops had landed.
Bro. Dude, like, I'm not trying to downplay D-Day, but like, they're trying to like make it out into something much more bigger than what it was. It's like, I'm not downplaying D-Day. I know it's important, but if anything, I would probably say that like what the Allies had to deal with in Italy, that was worse. That was worse. When they were landing in Sicily and whatnot, that was worse.
Exception of Omaha, the Allies generally succeeded in overwhelming the largely understrength, overstretched, and ill-prepared German defenders.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's like the Germans were just so exhausted that it's like, woohoo, you overwhelmed, exhausted prisoners of war that were literally captured by the Germans and forced to fight. Because a lot of these people that were literally fighting on D-Day, they weren't even actual German soldiers. They were literally just prisoners of war from captured countries that Germany invaded. And they were just put into forced conscription, which is interesting logic. I never really understood how that logic worked, because I always thought to myself, well, if they were put in forced conscription, then they could just like switch sides, you know, easily, you know. But it's like, woohoo, like woohoo allies, like woohoo, you beat like ragtag groups of German forces, woohoo.
The big question was, how would the German panzers respond? Incredible as it may seem, the massive Allied invasion force that was approaching the Normandy coast on the 5th of June went largely undetected by the Germans. Thanks to the poor weather in preceding days, an invasion was simply not expected at the time. Rommel was visiting his family in Germany, while most senior commanders in the invasion sector were, ironically, away on an anti-invasion training exercise when the blow fell.
What? What? The irony. No way. But I blame this on Rommel. Freaking going to get his wife some freaking gifts. Like, come on. Like, you should always think that anything, it's gonna be freaking possible. Like, come on now. I'm not being a hindsight warrior. No. Again, the German high command lost themselves the war.
The first major counterattack took place on D-Day itself. That afternoon, the 21st Panzer Division, the only German armoured formation in the area, drove between the British and Canadian forces, reaching the coast. But thanks to poor command decisions, confused communications, and the weight of Allied firepower, the attack was beaten back, with the 21st Panzers losing more than half of their 124 tanks.
You know what's funny? They got all the way to the beach, and this is why I said D-Day literally like should have failed. Like this is literally proof that they could have been instantly pushed out, because the Panzers made it all the way back to the beaches itself. The Allies just got lucky. And the German high command was dumb. I know I said that like so many times in this video, but it's just true. Wait, like I see so many people say, "Oh, Germany should have done X if they wanted to win," or "Oh, Germany lost World War II because the freaking German high command was dumb."
The rest of the German armour was under Hitler's direct control, but he was asleep until the afternoon, having worked late the night before. When informed, he's said to have reacted with glee. However, both Hitler and Rundstedt still believed that the landings in Normandy were a feint and that the main blow would come at Calais. Elements of Panzer Group West were released for use in Normandy, but by then it was too late. A full-strength German counterattack would have to wait. Instead, on D-Day itself, the Allies' biggest challenge was supply.
While the Mulberry harbors were being constructed, supplies...
The pain, the agony. Mustache Man and his plan literally could have worked. Oh man, you drove all the way to the freaking beaches. You got all the way to the beaches. But you had no reinforcements.
still had to be landed directly on the beaches in vehicles like this DUKW, or Duck. A six-wheel drive amphibious truck, the Duck was a valuable piece of the Allied war machine. However, they struggled in the rough channel waters. The steadily rising tide also caused major problems, reducing the shore's depth, which caused men, vehicles, and equipment to bunch up, restricting movement off the beach and providing good targets for German gunners. The impact of this is clear in the British advance on the city of Caen. What was meant to be a quick advance was slowed by German strongpoints as well as the traffic jams on the beach. The city, an objective for D-Day itself, would remain in German hands for another 6 weeks.
Though many key objectives were not taken, D-Day was undoubtedly a major success with 156,000 Allied troops ashore. On the 7th of June, the Allies further expanded their beachhead. Meanwhile, the Germans struggled to build up for their counterattack. The Allies had near total control of the skies, and so as Panzer Group West moved towards Normandy, they were hampered all the way by Allied fighter bombers, so much so that they had to abandon daylight movement. Elsewhere, members of the French resistance attempted to slow German reinforcements, and though they found some success, local people faced brutal reprisals. All this delayed and dislocated the German response.
When it came, it was the 12th SS Panzer Division from
The French resistance, kind of overrated,
Panzer
not
Group
gonna lie.
who made the strongest effort, attacking against the 3rd Canadian Division on D-Day +1. But the Allies were well prepared. The Canadian 3rd Division had twice the normal amount of field artillery and as many gunners in their order of battle as infantrymen. This Sexton self-propelled gun was one such weapon. With its 25-pounder gun, it was able to provide mobile fire support for British and Canadian forces in Normandy. Assisted by Allied warships off the coast, overwhelming Allied firepower was able to put a stop to the German counterattacks. When the Panzer Lehr Division arrived to join the attack on D-Day +2, the momentum had now been lost. And instead of counterattacking, they were forced to dig in to block the Allied attempts to take Caen.
On the 12th of June, the Allies captured Carentan, linking all 5 beaches together. With a constant stream of men and equipment pouring into their now vast beachhead on a daily basis, any German hopes of pushing the invaders back into the sea was folly. Hitler's chance for a counterattack was gone. The Western Allies had pulled off the largest air, land and sea operation in the history of warfare, a monumental achievement. It worked thanks to their skillful planning, overwhelming material advantage, and the heroism and sacrifice of their fighting men, as well as many German failures. While D-Day was by no means a turning point in the war, it did mark the beginning of a new phase.
Thank you for pointing out how D-Day was not the turning point.
In a year, crushed by Allied advances from east and west, the tyranny of the Nazi regime would finally come to an end.
I do agree that D-Day was necessary though, because, well, the Soviets would have controlled all of Europe today to D-Day. Look, man, go check out my other videos on my channel. I just made a video on the atomic bombings. Go check that out. After this video, make sure to subscribe if you've made it this far into the video, and don't forget to like the video as well. If you have any suggestions, tell me. And thank you for watching, and goodbye.